Have you noticed how mean people have become in the last 3 years? Have you noticed that? Maybe you're sitting by one of them. I don't know. But I mean, people have gotten mean. It's the sense of decorum and respect. It's like it's been tossed out the window. You just say whatever you want to say about someone. And the reason that people keep getting by with it is because we keep giving them a platform to do it. We buy their music, we watch their movies, we vote for them, we whatever you want to say. We keep giving them the platform to do it and saying it's okay. And here's the tough part, is it's probably going to continue to get worse. Because things like that usually don't get better with time. And that doesn't bode well for our children and for our grandchildren, does it? No, not at all. But in the book of Ruth, this love story that we're going to study today, we have a beautiful picture of how we are supposed to live. Because you see, our faith is more clearly expressed in the way we live than what we claim to believe. Our faith is more clearly expressed in the way we live than what we claim to believe. Can I get a nod? Yeah. And Ruth demonstrates this through the beautiful characters. As I studied the book of Ruth, I kept thinking about the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22, not the fruits of the Spirit, but the fruit of the Spirit, because I kept seeing these words emerge from the book of Ruth and the way they live. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Did I get them all in there? Memorize that. Because that's how we're supposed to live. It's the fruit of God living in and through us, and not only being expressed in our inner being, but in the lives of other people. And so I want you to look for that in the book of Ruth. We are supposed to be God's image bearers to the world. And the only way we will be his image bearers in the way that pleases him is if we are living out that fruit in our lives. Here's our big idea. God faithfully loves and cares for his own. Let's stop right there. God faithfully loves and cares for his own. And I want to change it up just a little bit for a second. And I want you to say this with me. God faithfully loves and cares for me. Say that with me. God faithfully loves and cares for me. Now you've proven to yourself you can say that. I want you to internalize it now and really think about that. God faithfully loves. No, I want you to say it. Come on. God faithfully loves and cares for me. Isn't that a great thought? Regardless of who you are or where you've come from or what you've done. God faithfully loves and cares for me. And in response to his love and care, our lives should reflect his character. The fruit of his Spirit lived out in us. We love a good story, don't we? Oh, we love a good story. When we were little, we'd climb up into a parent's lap or a grandparent's lap and say, tell me a story, tell me a story. My grandchildren are like that. They love to hear a good story. I'll tell them stories about when I was a little boy, and I have a little introduction to that I do. And now they've gotten to where they can fill in the blanks of the stories. They've heard them so much. Now, they don't like my stories as well as they love their grandma's stories, but once in a while they listen to mine. We love a good story, and the book of Ruth is a beautiful, beautiful story. Naomi said, I'm going back to Bethlehem. After her husband and her sons died, I'm going back home to Bethlehem. And Ruth, her daughter-in-law, said, I'm going with you. Now, every story has main characters, and we have three here, Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Naomi, the mother-in-law, Ruth, the daughter-in-law, and every good story at some point has a crisis or a conflict, correct? It's a structure of a story. And so immediately you think, oh, we see the conflict. We got a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. They're going to have it out at some point. But that is not what happens. There's another conflict, and we'll talk about that. And there's Boaz, a man of standing in the community, a man of character. The book of Ruth, there are 4 scenes, and you'll see each scene in each chapter. Scene 1 that you talked about last week is the background of the tragic story and their journey. And then in chapter 2, scene 2, we have Ruth meeting Boaz, and then in scene 3, there's the encounter on the threshing floor, and scene 4, you just have to wait until next week because we're going to cover scene 2 and scene 3 today. But everything about the book of Ruth, from its chiastic structure to the underlying Hebrew phrases and meanings that we won't have time to get into all of them today, it is a piece of art. And scholars view it as a literary masterpiece. When I read the book of Ruth, I can't help but think about the difficult journey. Whenever I'm at the Dead Sea, I think about Naomi and Ruth. Because let me tell you about this journey they were on. They were in Moab, so you can see right there at the bottom of the screen in the right-hand corner on this right side, there's Moab, from the descendants of Moab, the son of Lot, from an incestuous relationship. And they were at war with Israel throughout history. And then you have the little red dot. That would be Bethlehem, just right there beside Jerusalem. And they had to travel from Moab to Bethlehem. Now, here's the deal. Moab sits at 2,500 feet, right about 2,500 feet above sea level. And Bethlehem, Jerusalem area, sits at about 2,500 feet above sea level. But in between those two, you have the Great Rift Valley. And in this particular, that runs from Lebanon all the way down to Southeast Africa. And this little section here is the lowest part. It's the Jordan Rift Valley. And it drops off like, boom, like this. And so you can see a picture. I took this picture there because I think about them crossing this desert, arid, rough, rocky region. They didn't have merrills back then. They didn't have hiking boots. They had those old sandals or whatever they wore back then. But they had to travel that rough ground. And I've climbed a little bit there around En Gedi just to get up to the waterfall. And that's just a short space. And they had to travel 60 to 75 miles across this rough terrain, down those hills. Somewhere across the Dead Sea region, they had to find a way across and then back up. That was a long journey. It was also a dangerous journey because there were rough characters in those days. Because you remember what it says at the end of Judges, the book right before this one. What does it say? In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. For over 300 years, we have the period of the Judges where everyone was doing what they saw fit. They lived life through their own eyes, whatever they wanted to do. It's not a good way to live. I remember my son-in-law, Chris, who is a counselor and works with addiction. I was in his office in Denver one day, and I looked around the wall there, and he had these large posters all around the wall. And I looked at it, and I said, "That's the sin cycle." And he said, "Yeah. That's exactly what we deal with in addiction. It's the sin cycle, and you see it repeated over and over. If you've been through Panorama of the Bible, you see that sin cycle where there's rebellion and retribution and repentance and restoration and rest over and over again. That was the period of the Judges when all this happened. And if people were doing as they saw fit, they lived life through their own eyes, and they determined what was right and wrong from their own perspective. And Proverbs 14:12 tells us that that's a bad way to live, right? What does Proverbs 14:12 tell us? There's a way that seems right to us, but in the end, it leads to death. We need to live our lives through God's perspective, through His Word. what tells us is good and right and appropriate. Well, it's in this dark period of history when Naomi and Ruth and Boaz paint a beautiful picture of how we are supposed to live. Ruth broke the traditions of her idolatrous people, and she became a believer in the God of the Hebrews. Naomi, in the first chapter, you saw that they called her Naomi, which means pleasant, and she said, "Don't call me that. Call me Mara," because she was bitter. But all that's about to change. Let's look in chapter 2. Now Naomi had a relative of her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, can't get away from it. Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." And Naomi said, "See, they're poor. They're poor. Let me glean behind them." And Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." And so she went out and entered a field and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just by coincidence, right? The hidden hand of God. We see him moving. The hidden hand of God working through their lives. The same one that works through yours. The same one that works through yours. They were poor. Leviticus said that they had to provide a place for the poor. Look at it. It says, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap your field right up to its edge, nor shall you gather the gleanings after your harvest. You shall leave them for the poor and for the sojourner. I am the Lord your God. That's the exclamation point. Do it, he says. God was concerned for the poor, and I joined Sam in celebrating Samaritan Community Center moving here to our property. Our relationship's just going to continue to grow. And with that farm, we're going to be able to provide food for thousands of people in northwest Arkansas. Verse 4, just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," they answered. Now that tells me something about Boaz and the people he's hired. They are people of character. The Lord bless you. The Lord be with you. They're all acknowledging the Lord. Character is so important. I believe the character is what we are when nobody else is looking. It's what we are in the dark. I remember when I was a kid, go to church, and it seemed like every sermon lasted 3 hours. You know, and I'm still fidgety, but I was really fidgety back then. Got in trouble a few times for that. But it lasted 3 hours. Into the preaching, the preacher would call on somebody from the congregation to pray. Remember that? And he usually called on a deacon, somebody to lead us in prayer. And there was one guy. If he called on this guy, I was like, because he prayed the longest prayers. He remembered everybody who was sick. And it was not like God didn't already know. He had to call their names and call their aunts and uncles' names. He would just go on, and I would just, he called on him again. Well, one day when I was a teenager, I was working for a farmer, and we went to this guy's shop. And I could not believe my ears, because the same guy who said those long, eloquent prayers cursed like a sailor. And it really took me back. I couldn't believe it. I was really disappointed that this guy compartmentalized his life, the life that I was being challenged to live. He compartmentalized it to living one way on Sunday and another way throughout the week. And it probably gave me a little bit of license to go ahead and say some of those things myself. You know what I mean? But I was disappointed. I've never forgotten that. Character. Character is to be consistent throughout our lives, and that's what we see in Boaz and the people he's working for. Booker T. Washington said this about character. He said, character is power. You ever think about that? Character is not armor. It's not steel. It's not strength. I mean, power is not that. It's character. That's what gives us power, real power, the power that God recognizes. Well, Boaz in verse 5 asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" And the overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi. She said, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters.'" She was very polite. "She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter." And so they don't see her as a Moabite. They didn't expect anything good from a Moabite, but they're recognizing her character. She's a hard worker. And because of her character, Boaz shows her kindness. Look at this. "So Boaz said to Ruth, 'My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I've told the men not to lay a hand on you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled.'" Where her life was once hopeless, now she has hope from the man who has the ability to be her guardian. Next, in verse 10, we see that Ruth's character also elicits undeserved kindness. Verse 10, "At this she bowed down with her face to the ground, and she asked him, 'Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?'" You see, Ruth is having trouble getting out of the Moabite mode, getting past her history of the people who warred with Israel. As a matter of fact, when she left Moab, she probably expected to come to Bethlehem and be scorned and shunned by the people because of her history. And Boaz replied, look at this now. "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." He said, "Oh, I know all about you. I've heard about you, Ruth. I heard what you've done for Naomi." This ought to really encourage us, because God accepts her under his wings. We saw that in the book of Jonah. All those Gentiles, he was willing to let them repent and come underneath his wings. That's good news for the rest of us Gentiles, that he's got room for us. He's got room for all of us. There was a story that Donald Barnhouse used to tell. He's a preacher a long time ago. It talked about God's great love for us. He said when he was a kid, they lived in the prairie, and there was a prairie fire, and it burned down their barn, it burned down their house, it burned everything that they had. And he and his father were walking through the rubble, and his father saw a piece of what looked like tree bark on the ground, and he kicked it. And when he kicked it, little baby chicks ran everywhere. On closer examination, he looked down, and it wasn't a piece of bark at all. It was a mother hen. And when the fire came, she gathered her chicks beneath her wings and protected them from the disaster. God has room for us beneath his wings, and he invites us to come and find shelter there. Doesn't matter who you are, Ninevite, Moabite, whoever you are, whatever you've done, God has room for you underneath his wings. He is the God of the second chance. He is the God of starting over. Isn't that great news? It's great news for all of us. Well, we go on in verse 13. Ruth says, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord? You have put me at ease. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have standing as one of your servants. And in mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here and have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar. And when she sat down with all the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain, and she ate all she wanted and had some left over. It had probably been a long time since she had had a meal like that. And then he let her take her grain, and she went back to Naomi. And oh, we see joy here. Verse 19, her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. Look at all this grain you have. Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one whose place she had been working. The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz, she said. The Lord bless him, Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead. And she added, that man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers, or you may have heard the term kinsman redeemer. And I'm not going to develop that. I'm going to let whoever's teaching next week do that. It's important. Naomi is excited. Boaz is a relative and therefore a guardian of them. And so when a woman had lost her husband, the next of kin would become their guardian, redeemer. And then Ruth, the Moabite, it keeps on saying, he even said to me, stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed. And so Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. You see, when they were crossing that deserted, arid, rocky, mountainous region on their way to Bethlehem, they had no idea that the hidden hand of God was working through them and for them. And so at the beginning of this story, we see Ruth being faithful to Naomi, and now we see Naomi being faithful to Ruth. Verse 1, one day Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, my daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Maybe Naomi is getting older and she's afraid that she'll die and Ruth will be left alone. She said, I've got to find a home for you. And so she instructs Ruth next in a Near Eastern custom that is foreign to us today. But she told her to go to the threshing floor where Boaz would be, where he would stay the night to protect his harvest from thieves. And there she was to lie down at his feet and uncover his feet. And if he awakened and saw her, she would ask him to cover her with his cloak. And this was a proposal of marriage. And if he covered her with his cloak, then that meant that he accepted her proposal. Now, there is nothing indecent about this, as some have asserted. It was just a custom in that day. And look what happened. He woke up. And he said, the Lord bless you, my daughter. This is verse 10. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Look what she had done. She had come to a foreign place, and everybody knew this is a woman of character, although she didn't necessarily see that in herself. Others did. Excuse me. Boaz made it a point to point out her character. Although it is true that I'm a guardian redeemer, here comes the crisis in the story. Although it is true that I'm a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. That's the crisis. There's somebody else. Now, Naomi's going to encourage Ruth to be patient. Excuse me. So verse 16, when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? And then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. For the man will not rest until this matter is settled. Just watch and wait Because this man of character, this man of standing will not rest until this is settled. You see, God faithfully loves and cares for his own. God faithfully loves and cares for his own, and he's caring for Ruth and Naomi. We see the fruit of the Spirit lived out in the lives of all three of our main characters. I want you to think about it. The inner qualities. Think about each of these words. Love. How does it manifest in your life? As a matter of fact, just close your eyes and think about these words. Love. Joy. Peace. Are you at peace with God? If not, he's waiting for you to come under his wings. Patience. Are you a patient person? Do you need to let go of the rope? Kindness. Goodness. Those were characters expressed to others. And then these are marks of a Christ-filled life. Faithfulness. Gentleness. And self-control. When the qualities are evident in our life, God can do through us more than we could ever ask or imagine. We see clearly God working, his hidden hand working through the lives of Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. But do you believe that his hidden hand is also guiding your life? Or is that just for somebody else? Trust me, he's working in and through you, just like he did them. In about 5 weeks, I'm going to take a group of people to the edge of Jerusalem, and we're going to look over a field in eastern Bethlehem. And it was in that field that a young boy named David tended sheep. You see, they had a son. Ruth and Boaz had a son named Obed, and they had a son named Jesse, and Jesse had a son named David, who would call Ruth great-grandma. Oh, thank you very much. He would call Ruth great-grandma. He would be one day called King David. He learned a lot about shepherding and sheep out in that field. He wrote a psalm about it, Psalm 23. About 1,000 years later, there would be other shepherds working in that same field. And one night, an angel of the Lord appeared to them. They were terrified. And he said, "Don't be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy, which shall be for all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, who is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign to you. You'll find the baby wrapped in cloths and lying in a manger." And as we stand there on that hill overlooking those fields, we'll imagine what it was like when the heavenly hosts filled the sky, glorifying God. But it was in those same fields that a young lady named Ruth met a fella named Boaz. And they had no idea what God was doing in and through their lives. What an incredible story, huh? Yours is an incredible story too. Just watch God work. Oh Lord, thank you for faithfully loving and caring for each of us. And Lord, we trust your hidden hand working in and through our lives. Oh Lord, make it ever more clear to us each day how much you love us, how faithful you are to us and how deeply you care.